Hello, welcome everyone to our weekly virtual discussion series that's hosted by the Chaldean Cultural Center in collaboration with U of M Detroit Center, Unique Voices in Films, and CMN TV. And today, in honor of International Poetry Month, we have a Chaldean American poet, Anne Esshaki.
Yes.
Welcome.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me, Liam. I'm very honored to be here.
Thank you for writing your recent book. I love the title, Kildani. I love the title of the book. And so, Anne, you studied at Eastern Michigan University and earned your MA of Creative Writing at Wayne State University and a BA of English.
Yes,
Yes, so we have a writer at hand who's
that's
very
me.
happy to hear that. So I want to talk about your recently published book, which is called Kildani. First of all, what does that word mean to you?
Well, Kaldani means I am Chaldean. That's a literal translation. But for me, I really wanted this book to be a representation of being Chaldean. And I wanted that because growing up, I didn't have much literature or much of anything, to be honest, that I could go to and read about my history, read about my culture, and learn more about it. So I wanted something to be created that I could hand to someone and say, "Here, read this. This is who I am." So
That's
I,
beautiful. And you know, I, as a writer myself, I felt the same way. I grew up not seeing myself in any of the stories, and I felt like there was a void, and I tried to fill that. So that is why I'm very excited when I see authors like yourself putting in that attempt and putting themselves out there and sharing these stories. So when did your interest in writing start?
wow, it was a long time ago. I started writing poetry when at a very young age. I was about 8 years old. And I started to just journal, and I was a rhyming poet. So the last word in every sentence or every like I guess you could say line had to rhyme.
Mhm.
So that's kind of where I started off. I wrote mostly for fun, because I just liked how it sounded. I liked how poetry sounded. I liked how metaphorical I could be with the page. Um, and then I would say I started to take it more seriously when I got to college. I was in a chemistry program, and that was my focus. I was going to go to pre-med, and I remember going to like a counselor, and he said to me, "Why are you majoring in chemistry?" And I said, "Well, I want to, go to pre-med, so I figured if I major in chemistry, this will help." And he said, "Well, you can major in anything you want to major in. It doesn't have to be a science program. It doesn't have to be something related to the medical field." And I was like kind of taken aback by that because I've always loved English. And I thought, well, why not major in English and then still do my, pre-med courses? The next semester I took 4 English classes and I just hit the ground running. I switched from pre-med. I said, I'm going to be a writer. And this was it because I saw something that I never had saw before, and that was being able to make a career of my writing.
That's an interesting story. What do you think he saw in you that caused him to make that suggestion?
Well, to be honest, I was struggling with organic chemistry. It just wasn't something that was, clicking for me. And I was in my second try. The first time I was like, I can't do this. And I withdrew from the class and I said, I'm going to study more and go try and, do it again. And on that second try, that's when he said to me, why are you pushing yourself so hard to be, in a sense, a chemist when you don't even need these classes to go to medical school. And I was like, oh, okay, well, okay, let me do something that I know that I am passionate about, and that was English. I loved not just writing poetry, but I love to write stories and I like to write essays.
And do you think this is somewhat of a cultural thing that in our community there's a sense of more importance towards certain careers like law, like medicine, and there's that expectation? Because I know when I was trying to make up my decision as well, I knew that I was considering going into law school. because I knew I would be good like as a student, but I knew I would be bad as a lawyer because that was my passion. And I said,
Yeah.
I'm just going to write on the side. And I kind of minimized where my love and my passion was because everybody was encouraging me, yes, to be either that lawyer or the doctor, of course.
Yeah.
So do you think that there's like that cultural aspect to it that's in our Middle Eastern community?
I think most definitely. And I think it stems from, our parents wanting success. And to them, they see doctors and lawyers and nurses as a career that they know that you will be successful in. So I think that that's kind of, where it stems from is that they just want to know that their kids are going to be okay and successful and um, be happy, you know?
Just makes them
Um,
like sleep better at night. Like,
yeah,
they'll be
exactly,
making the money.
exactly. Yeah, for sure, for sure. And like there are a lot, I mean, I have cousins and friends who are doctors and lawyers, and they are very passionate about their careers and they are doing a very good job in those careers and they're making strides, like Dr. Mona Atisha, like if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't know about the Flint water crisis, right?
Right.
So,
Oh
you
yeah.
know,
I mean, right. And that's wonderful that any career that you go into with that passion, but that's the thing I think when it comes to creativity, sometimes the it doesn't seem like it's as nurtured or there's like so much
right.
fears associated to it. So when you do go into something like that, it really does take a lot of courage and passion. So
Yes,
um
it was hard to tell my mother that I was switching from pre-med to being a writer.
yes, I can
But now
imagine.
now she sees it and she's very proud.
Excellent. That sounds like how my mom was. She was thinking like, you're always with all these books, but it's like you're not being, like something so big. But then over time, and when she saw me doing the interviews and the readings and my position, she started to really understand and appreciate what the kind of work that I had done. So
Right.
I'd love to hear what your book is about, and what was the process like when writing it?
Ah. So my book is about Chaldean identity. Kaldani is a part of a trilogy. So there's going to be other versions of the book that come out.
Can you hold it up a
This,
little bit more, Anne, please? Can you hold it up a
yes.
little bit more?
Oh yeah,
I'd like to see yes. Thank you very much. Okay.
for sure. So this is the front, and then this is the back, and it's going to be like I said, a part of a trilogy.
Mhm.
This particular one is about genocide and diaspora. So I wanted to focus on the hardships that Chaldeans had to go through in order to flee the persecution that they were going through in their homeland to get to wherever they were going, whether that was Metro Detroit, California, Chicago, or other countries, anything outside of where they were in Iraq. And then I wanted to focus on how the diaspora has altered our identities as Chaldeans, whereas we're still Chaldean, but now we're Chaldean Americans, right? We're no longer Iraqi Chaldean. So I wanted this book to show that and to show how we've held on to our identity, but at the same time, in ways, have assimilated to American culture.
Oh, I love that. That's really, it says it all. So what I would like, if we could like have you read some poetry right now, I would love to hear some of the poetry that's in the book, and then we can also hear some towards the end. But why don't you? I'm gonna go ahead and just and camera myself, and then I would love you to just read a couple of poems.
Okay, for sure. So the first poem that I would like to read, let me find it in here. Now this one is called Stations of the Cross. And just a little background about this poem. In the process of writing the book, I did research in terms of speaking to different people in the community, reading whatever books that I could find about our community. This poem, this was during Lent, and I was going to church to go to the Stations of the Cross, and I saw my cousin in the church, and I hadn't seen him in a long time. So it just kind of inspired me to write this poem. A grandmother's seat in church is like reserved parking, like a station, a rest area. Her presence felt with subtle reminders like your first cousin sitting in the pews on the same side she sat, and thinking how she must be praying with you and him and bragging to all her friends in heaven. Broned nubil ubratit vahira ile soloyed gawit eta, which means the son of Nabil and the daughter of Bahira are praying in church together. And knowing that the same force that led you here also called him, and together you recite the prayers in your mother's tongue. Words seep into roots, hydrating spirits that sprout from land where mathematics and astronomy began, and hear the chants of Mar Agde and Martoma. This church survives because of martyrs. It survives because you and your cousin decided to come to church. So that was Stations of the Cross. And then the next poem that I would like to read, and I think this one is definitely one of my favorites from the book because I feel like it does a really good job of capturing that feeling of being Chaldean American and trying to assimilate into a culture where you don't know the language, which we all know having a language barrier can make things very, very hard. So this is called Dead Language. This language cannot die, must not die. Why did she have to die? Why can't this school understand? I'm trying. I fled my home with barely anything and lived in refugee camps with nothing to nourish my mind or body. No, Yuma did not make it. She, like Jesus, sacrificed her life for me. I can't think past the moment of my mother's passing. My friends and I cannot read these books, so we crack jokes in the back of class. We may not know English, but we know about having resources. It's not my fault that you don't speak my language. So these are two poems that I feel do a really good job of capturing the essence of what I wanted from the book. For people to hear and understand about Chaldean identity, about how hard it is to, like I said, assimilate into a culture and not being able to speak with someone about how you're feeling, or maybe ask questions about something that you don't understand because there's this language barrier between you and them.
Yeah, and I do think that there is still a lot of there isn't enough awareness about the genocide that has occurred to the Chaldeans and the Christian minorities in Iraq. There's really there's not enough, and part of it is because some of the way that we share all these wounds are really subtle. The way we do it, I think, like through maybe creativity, but we haven't we've been on survival mode, and so sometimes we're still like going over that next stage of trying to get awareness about what happened and why it's important to realize this ancient language needs to live, and what we need to do to participate in that. What has been the biggest challenge in your writing and your poetry career, would you say?
Wow. Honestly, writing. It's like to find the time to write, I find that I get inspired in moments that I don't have anything around me or I don't have the time to sit down and write. So I'll be on the go constantly. I'm at work right now, and I said I'm going to take my lunch break. I'm going to do the interview, and I got to go back to work, right? I take care of my parents too, and we have like family businesses that I help out with. So for me right now, the hardest time, or the hardest thing with my writing is actually finding the time to write. But once I get in the mode, it's like it just flows, because it's something that I enjoy so much that you have to peel me away from the computer. I get so zoned into it. It's like the world around me just disappears and I'm in a whole new world when I'm writing.
And what's been then, I guess you just answered that, the rewarding part of your writing is entering into that new world.
Yeah, I mean, of course, like going into another, reality and being able to escape this one for a moment. But I feel the most rewarding is people who have read my works who come to me and say that there was something about it that touched them, you know, or that changed their perspective, or that brought their awareness to something that maybe they weren't thinking about before. Recently, someone came up to me who had read my book, and they said they bought it and they had their whole family sit down and they read the book to them from the beginning to the end, because they were going to start with just a few poems, but everyone in the room was like, no, read another, read another, read another. And she told me one of the poems made her mother cry. And that, even though it's sad that someone was crying, it's very rewarding as a writer to know that I can invoke an emotion like that.
Oh, of course. Yeah. And you know, you mentioned earlier that you grew up not seeing the stories in the books, and um, this is how I felt as well. But so in that case, what and who inspired you throughout your career?
Family, friends, community. You know, I grew up very much in the church. I was an altar girl until I was about 14 years old. So I knew a lot of people in the church that I could go back to and ask questions and interview. And there were people in the community that I reached out to, you know, ask questions, maybe stories that they could tell me. My own mother, my grandmother, when she was alive, I was listening to the stories that she was telling me. So I guess you could say this wasn't something that was just researched in the last 5 years. You know, this book is definitely a part of me in terms of my identity, and putting what my experience was being Chaldean into this book as well. But also taking the experience of other Chaldeans around me and adding that into here. You know, obviously I didn't immigrate to this country. I was born here, but there are stories that include people who immigrated and maybe lost a family member in the process of that immigration. That's a story that I knew had to be told. Something like that. I was reading a lot of news articles about what was going on in Iraq and about how Iraqi Christians were fleeing, and the stories about there was this one story, and it broke my heart to hear it. And there's a poem in here about it. There was women who were fleeing with their kids, and they had to flee up into the mountains to get away from ISIS and whoever was trying to harm them. And instead of allowing ISIS to capture their children, they would throw their children off the mountaintop because they didn't want ISIS. And that just, I'm sorry, but it chokes me up every time that I talk about it, because I can't imagine as a mother to feel that feeling, right? And this is something that people need to know about, that there's a person in this world that had to make a decision between their child being captured and kidnapped or their life. And that's so hard to think about.
And you know, have you to Iraq, Anne, or you've never visited? Not
I've
yet.
never visited, no, but I have these very old VHS tapes that I think it was Father Michael Bezzi. He has these videotapes, and I found them in my mom's house. One is pink and one is blue, and one shows you all the churches and the other one shows you all the villages. So it was kind of like a virtual tour on VHS.
That's funny you say that, because you know, we had him on recently and we're planning to do a film screening about some of those videos that he made. A lot of them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a lot of them, because he visited the villages when they were still well, and you know.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're planning to do a film screening. It's interesting that you've seen that, and you know, he's all about that, making sure that he created and documented things so that the younger generation can have the chance to view it. And I know that he'd be very happy to hear that people are viewing it.
Yes, so we are. I'm so happy to have been able to see it before, of course, it got destroyed. So I have this footage now that I can actually access and look at and know,
right. and I'm sure it's inspiring. Right, it inspires. So what are you currently working on? And is there a project that you're working on right now?
Yeah, so I'm actually working on a couple of projects. I'm working on the next installation of this book of Keldani. The next one is going to be Cultures and Traditions. So things like Beutha, Hanna parties. Like,
oh, that sounds so much fun.
Yeah. So it's like I want people to know like the fun, because this one is a little bit dark. The genocide and diaspora aspect of our identity, of course, is going to be sad. So I want to bring the light to, and the happiness about being Chaldean and what that looks like. So that's one that I'm working on. I'm also working on a Chaldean alphabet book, which is being illustrated by a young Chaldean man in our community. He's about 13 or 14 years old, and he's an amazing illustrator.
Oh my
And
goodness. I can't wait.
yeah,
You have to let us know when these books come out. That will
I
be
will. I will for
have
sure.
your
The
background
illustration,
on those. That sounds
yeah.
amazing. So is this like I mean, like what's your vision for your work 5 to 10 years from now? Is this really how you want to just kind of have these different books that represent and maybe share culture and arts and history about the Chaldeans?
Yeah. So right now, my main focus is making sure that I get enough material out there so that if someone says, well, what does it mean to be a Chaldean? I can say, well, read these books, or you can use these as references, or maybe someone is like, well, where did you learn how to read and write Chaldean? And I can say, well, you can start with this alphabet book, right? Because it's not just for children, even though it's going to be like illustrations. This is something that even the parents, while they're reading with their kids, are going to be able to start to learn and understand the language as well. And right now, of course, I have other projects that I'm working on too that aren't just about Chaldean identity. I'm working on a story about a young Iranian woman named Azar, and she's dealing with the issue that her family wants her to wear her hijab and she doesn't want to wear it. So there's this constant conflict between her and her family, and she has a best friend who is American and doesn't understand why she deals with all this like verbal and physical abuse from her family. Whereas she tries to explain to her it's not just about not wanting to wear the hijab, but this is her mom, this is her dad, these are her brothers, and it's harder to just get up and leave and walk away over a disagreement. So it's showing that conflict between East and West, and I wanted to be able to branch out of Chaldean identity, but still have the stories about Middle Eastern identity be told, because there's not a lot. So I guess you could say my focus is bringing the underrepresented to the forefront. That's what I want my writing to do.
Beautiful. And then, what would you advise younger writers who feel underrepresented and marginalized? So you just mentioned these are the people that you're trying to represent and the stories that you're trying to tell. And people who feel that way, but writers and maybe kind of feel like, well, there's no really room for them, or there's no market for them. Well, what advice would you give them?
I would say that is it's really hard because I remember thinking to myself, well, no one's going to want to read about Chaldean identity besides Chaldeans. But once I got a book out there and once I started to get writing out there, I proved myself wrong completely. People are very interested in who the Chaldeans are, where we come from. So I would say if you have a story to tell it, because there is someone who wants to read it, and that once they do read it, it's going to change their life.
It's good advice. And we only have a couple of minutes left, so I would love for you to read us some more poetry.
Okay, for sure. I would love to do that as well.
All right, great.
Okay, so this next poem that I'd like to read, this is called Baking Bread. And this is a story about how when I was younger, about 8 or 9 years old, and me and my mom would go over to my grandmother's house. We called her Yuma. We'd go over to Yuma's house and we would go and we would bake that very, very thin bread, the one that if you tap it, it just, crumbles into a million pieces. But I remember this is one of my fondest memories of being around my grandma. The smell of its freshness seeps through the basement door. Hayu Brati, come here, my daughter. Stay unsota. Go help your grandmother. Your perfume, your Chloe, assimilating scent of your hard work. In front of the stove, a wooden round table, 6 inches from the ground. Your feet wrapped around its base. Your hands on the thin rolling pin, rolling until the dough is transparent. Transparency is the way you told me about your grandmother with each roll of your pen, about how she created the fire in the brick oven, about how she and you and your sister and your mom would work together to bake a week worth of bread, about how much preparation it took making the bread, mixing it the day before, and having the patience for it to rest, coming back the next day and continuing as if you never stopped, tirelessly rolling and cooking and preserving. Transparency is knowing that you preserved her and her and her and you and me in bread. So that poem is about how this moment with my grandmother baking bread, it wasn't just about the bread, it was about the stories that they were telling me, about what they were teaching me, and how that stuck with me throughout time. And I guess you could say, in a sense, led me to writing this book that would bring awareness to Chaldean identity. So I am looking for this next poem that I want to read. This poem, the next poem that I want to read, this was a story that my sister-in-law's father told me. And it's about him, the story itself. And it was just, it took my breath away when he told me that this is something that happened to him as a baby. This is called Castaway. His mother threw him out a window to save his life, the life they came to take in exchange for his father's. Each swing of the knife followed by a command. Tell us where he is. His father dreams of a better life, and his mother endures its scars, her scars. Lacerations breathing on her chest, jagged cuts replacing her nipples. Her weakened eyes unable to focus, but able to raise 15 kids that raise each other, help her, and help each other. With pride, her eyes bruise silence, praying that they did not find him. A woman finds him in the haystack, wraps him in her dastasha, and nurses him to health. So this was a story about her grandmother. So my sister-in-law's grandmother actually threw her son out the window when these radical men came to her house looking for her husband. And they wanted to capture her husband and kill him, but he fled into the mountains. So they were from El Kush, and they fled into them. He fled into the mountains. So she knew if they knew she had a son, that they would take the son and kill him, because that's how you, in a sense, that's how you would kill the father. You kill his son, you kill his name. So she threw him out the window, so they wouldn't know that she had a son. And he just so happened to land on a haystack, and a woman neighbor, found him, picked him up, and took him to her home until they left. And then the grandmother, she passed out obviously from the attack because they were cutting her. They cut her nipples, they cut her chest. She still has these scars. And she woke up, and the woman brought, the child back to her. And after that, they fled.
And you are capturing amazing, amazing stories. Thank you so much for writing this book. Thank you for coming on for this interview. And please be in touch with us as the next books come out, okay?
Okay,
Thank
I will.
You
Thank you
much.
so much.
Thank you. I loved talking with you today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We will provide a recording of this interview. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye.